I'm sure you've heard the saying, how do you make a little money in aviation? Start with a lot. The cost of operating in Australia right now, whether you're a student working towards your license, a private pilot trying to purchase an aircraft or just keep current, or an operator running a fleet, has risen sharply over the last few years. It's not one thing though, it's everything all at once. And for a sector that was already running on tight margins before COVID, the compounding effect is increasing all costs and viability of general aviation. Today's episode, I want to break down some of these major cost pressures, talk about what it means for all of us, and offer some practical budgeting strategies for those of us trying to stay airborne. I'm going to talk about that and more coming right up. So strap in and let's get into it.
Good morning, 7614, 95 Mallow 7 POB with altitude.
Coordinating, Halen, I'm running bank power, bank pressure rolling to 30 degrees. That's 30 degrees there. Set by star 9000, 1013, K 525.
G'day everyone and welcome to episode 201 of the Flight Training Australia podcast. The podcast all about flight training and flying in Australia and beyond. G'day, I'm your host Trent Robinson and thank you for joining me again. Sorry about the little break again. I keep saying again, don't I? But just had a few things on the last couple of weeks and gave you a bit of extra time to listen to the 200th episode anyway. That was a bit of a long one. Thank you again for everyone who came along. A big change of plans. As I said, we were going to have a function, a barbecue down at the threshold of the runway, and the weather was not friendly, so it was a very last minute chop and change. So it did pose some recording issues and filming issues, but I hope you've all enjoyed it, and we had some good interviews with fellow aviators like your good selves, and it was a really great night to share with everybody. So thank you again to everyone who came, and thank you to all of you for listening and supporting the podcast and the work that I'm doing. So in that time, so much has happened. So first of all, I have to give my heartfelt condolences to everyone in Adelaide, down at Parafield at FTA, for the loss of an instructor, colleague, a friend, and a student. Just terrible tragedy, and one that, if it wasn't bad enough in itself, but then the impact with the hangar and affecting the ground crew as well. So wishing everyone a speedy recovery, and as I always do, I strongly encourage you to talk about it. These things, we're not usually expecting to deal with something like that at that stage of your career, and it really can shock you, and it's just a horrible thing to have to go through, no matter what or who it is. But please do talk about it and seek help if you're feeling uncomfortable at all, and make sure that you don't allow it to impact on you more than it already has. We tend to sort of try and bottle this stuff up inside and act tough, but these things can affect us in ways that we don't necessarily anticipate. So fingers crossed everyone's doing okay, and we'll look to the outcome of the investigation there. And just tragedy, absolute tragedy. But my heartfelt condolences to everybody. Rose, congratulations. She's just finished her solo trip around Australia. You got to do a bunch of command hours for your license. So why not fly around the country and break a record at the same time? So well done. I had the pleasure of meeting Rose when she popped up here to Darwin on her way through, and gave her a little bit of guidance on the leg up to here and out. And she was going to stay a day or two, and the next minute she was off to Kununurra the next day. She was expecting to do a 50 hourly, but she'd made up a bit of time, so it was a little bit early for that. And I think she was going to get to Perth before the 50 hourly was due. So, well done. She just got back the other day, and what a great adventure, and raising some awesome money for Little Wings along the way. So if you aren't aware or familiar with Little Wings, look them up. They do some fantastic work, and a great organisation. So rising costs in aviation. The cost of flying is going up, and it's not just the fuel. But let's start with the fuel, because naturally that's the big talking point at the moment, whether you're driving a car or flying a plane. Sounds like a VB ad, doesn't it? But, obviously the most visible cost in aviation is fuel. We spend it and we burn it. That's how we burn through dollars. And the typical avgas, bill for a training aircraft, we had pre-pandemic lows around 2020, 2021 and avgas, it would be $2 to $2.50 a litre. We had the post-Ukraine invasion energy crisis. We've got obviously everything going on in Iran at the moment, pushing prices up again. And these global shocks, they flow directly into Australian pump prices, compounded by the Australian dollar, freight costs, manufacturing costs, and relatively small volume in the scheme of things, because a lot of countries have stopped using avgas, or it's just outright not available. So particularly in regional and remote areas, there's just simply no market competition to help keep prices in check. So at most airports, I think around Australia, averaging probably about $3.50 a litre, and obviously significantly more in regional airfields. So let's just say for a typical, Cessna 172 burning 30 odd litres an hour, that's in the ballpark of $105 just for the fuel alone, roughly a $30 per hour increase compared to just a few years ago, pushing up training rates. And that's before, the cost of the aircraft, the instructor, or anything else. Jet A1 telling a similar story for turbine operators, and the costs are going up as well, increasing significantly for operators to keep those aircraft running, and passing on these costs to the hirer, be it a training aircraft, which is pretty minimal, but typically the client. So one thing worth understanding, I've seen questions about this on Instagram and Facebook, is the costs of fuel levies. And some schools are truly trying to help by absorbing some of these fuel costs, but we're talking about nearly $1 a litre, which is a third of the fuel cost, if you think about it that way. And it's just too much to absorb. And schools and operators making minimal profits as it is sometimes without having to do that. So it's just not sustainable if prices stay elevated or even keep climbing. There is rumour that it's going to go up another 20, 30 cents soon. So, let's hope that's not the case. So what are we to do? Well, rather than constantly change aircraft rates, you will find that a lot of operators are adding in a fuel levy, which is a perfectly normal, legal, sensible thing to do, in my opinion. Rather than having to change all the marketing material, course costs and everything else, it's easier just to leave it as it is and add on a fuel levy of whatever the price increase is times the hourly rate or hourly burn rate of the aircraft. So I know a lot of schools have been emailing members or students about the current rates and the fuel levy charges, which typically most airports have a monthly fuel price change. And for the most part, it's been absolutely stable until all of this has gone on. But now it's going up. But some places are changing a little more regularly than that, in which case prices are going up and down as needed. All right, so it is more transparent for everybody. And, if you're shopping for training or one of the school rates looks cheaper than another, just double check, what's the fuel rate that's been factored into that pricing, and if there is a levy involved at all. All right, so from fuel, we then move on to landing fees. And in more recent cases, Darwin has been probably the most dramatic example, but it's not an isolated case, but it is a warning, as I've said previously, as to what can happen when airport pricing operates without any meaningful oversight. So if you missed it a little while ago, the Airport Development Group, which operates Darwin Airport, increased its landing fees from $36.39 per tonne to $77.71 per tonne. And this started in July 2025. So that's a 114% increase, and the largest single year jump at any major Australian airport. The Regional Aviation Association of Australia got involved, local MPs, calling it a bit of an unreasonable cash grab. The way it was going to be done with a 3-tier landing fee structure required us individuals to negotiate rates, submit financial audits, give access to financial data, something that had just never been done anywhere else in the country, and was being based on the type of passengers or people in the aeroplane. So from a $40 landing fee previously, a 172, for example, would be $85. To land a twin is anywhere between $150 to $180 for a lighter twin, and obviously it just keeps going from there. The DC-3, for example, is upwards of about $750 a landing. Now, luckily, there's not a whole lot of training that goes on in Darwin. MKT is further south. There's obviously myself and another school that do operate out of Darwin. These costs are real and they need to be paid for by somebody. And unfortunately, that's you guys, the students. But what about the rest of the country? Metro training airports. All right, you can look all this up too, by the way. It's all on AvData. For the most part, majority of airports run through AvData now for their airport charging. And it's, Moorabbin, for example, between sort of Jandakot and Moorabbin, probably the busiest southern hemisphere GA airports. Daily access charge rather than a per landing fee. So that rate was $39.42 per tonne per day for aircraft under 7,000 kilos, which has been up 5%. But the catch with the daily model is whether you do one circuit or 20, you're paying the same daily charge. So apparently it's a little bit controversial, but I don't know. It doesn't sound too bad. But Bankstown, they're charging $20.43 per tonne for the first landing of the day. Each subsequent landing on the day at a flat $9.95. So that's probably based more around a training structure. I'm not quite sure how that gets broken up to be charged to students. So if have a good solid day, it might work out a little bit. But if you're just flying one, I guess you've got to cop the full brunt. Jandakot's changed a little bit since I was down there. Full stop landing, $15.20 per tonne with a minimum of $24. Circuit fees, they used to be about $2 to $3 a touch and go. Now they're up to $7.20 per tonne. And there's also a penalty fee of $120 per circuit outside the fly enabling hours. This was, I think that's a new charge, but it was definitely no circuits at night after 10 p.m, I think it was. I didn't go double check the time, but 10:30. So you don't want to be doing training outside of that time. You can only just come in and land. All right, Parafield seems to be behaving itself and doing pretty well. But then regional airports, you've got, Ballarat sitting around $10.91 a tonne, Dubbo $13.91, Rockhampton $6.36 per tonne under 4 tonnes. So, there's some decent prices there. But then we moved to Alice Springs, Tennant Creek, $37 to $39 per tonne. And then we've got some airports in WA, $40 to $55 per tonne. And Wiluna in WA, if you want to pop in there at night and you're over 5,700 kilos, $200 a tonne. So don't want to be doing that. But luckily, most of us aren't flying over 5,700 kilos at the moment. So the practical implication, of these landing fees is probably most felt, A, if you're based at that airport, or B, if you're trying to do cross-country navigation exercises. If you visit a couple of airports on your trip, you may well have several $100s of landing fees per flight, depending on your route. And I think that cost is largely responsible for schools choosing the same low-cost, if not free, airports for their training and circuit work. But the fallout of that is we're getting students, and we see this all the time up here in Darwin, that have learnt how to fly a circuit at those particular aerodromes, and as soon as they go somewhere else, aka Darwin, they've got no idea how to space themselves out. And, big fallout for that sort of stuff. But again, I get it. I understand it. Instrument approaches, same sort of thing. All right. So the 140% increase at Darwin, it's an extreme case, but it also, what it does is it illustrates a structural reality that airport pricing in Australia, outside of declared airports subject to ACCC oversight, is essentially unregulated. So airports can set whatever rate the market will bear. And for aviation, especially like Darwin, where there is nowhere else to go, there's no alternative. That is a monopoly pricing environment. This concern has been shared by the RAAA and AOPA, by operators, but unfortunately it's falling on deaf ears. So why is that? Well, now we need to go to the privatisation problem. So the whole root of all this is a policy decision made in the 1990s that aviation community is still paying for today. And that's literally the privatisation of Australian airports transferred what are fundamentally pieces of public infrastructure into the hands of private operators. Superannuation funds, institutional investors whose primary obligation is not to aviation but to their shareholders. An airport needs to generate returns for a pension fund that has structurally different set of priorities to one that's operated in the public interest. Airports are key infrastructure for the community. Take Darwin, for example, with the wet season and the amount of flooding and the amount of flights that had to go back and forward out of here, out of Batchelor, out of MKT. But the increase in fuel costs and landing fees to those operations, not to mention rents and leases and everything else that's going on. So the consequences are visible everywhere. Landing fees that price out the general aviation community, hangar and leasehold rents that are doubling, have gone far beyond CPI, and perhaps most corrosively, airport land being carved off for retail precincts, residential developments, and commercial tenancies that have nothing to do with aviation. Just look at Moorabbin as a key example. Jandicott's not far behind. Every square metre, lost to a warehouse, to a cafe strip, to a shopping centre, irreplaceable aviation infrastructure, gone permanently forever. Right? Airports are not shopping centres with runways attached. Look at Essendon. Right, just about to the point where the shopping centre's encroached on the airport boundary. Right, they're the strategic national assets that once the land goes, it does not come back. And unfortunately, places like Darwin and others fall outside of ACCC oversight, and there's nothing that can be done unless that changes. And these concepts have never been designed with long-term health of general aviation in mind. Right, then we move on to Air Services Australia charges. Air Services is obviously the government-owned monopoly provider of air traffic management services in the country. En route navigation, terminal navigation, aviation rescue and firefighting. So for a long time, its prices were essentially frozen. That lasted, the last increase was about 0.4% in 2015 and actually cut them by 2% in 2019. And that ended decisively in 2025. And after an ACCC consultation process, during which Air Services initially proposed cumulative increases of up to 19% across 4 tranches. The 6% weighted average increase was approved. So ACCC signed off in October 2024, approved in June 2025 by the Minister, and then 1st of August 2025 these prices took effect. Now, for most GA operators, air services charges apply primarily through terminal navigation fees at controlled aerodromes and en route charges for IFR flights. If you're doing circuit training at an uncontrolled airfield, the direct impact is pretty much nil. But IFR training, cross-country flights, operators using Class C or D airspace regularly, the 6% increase is another line on an already crowded Excel spreadsheet, isn't it? Right, but worth flagging as well, Air Services has signalled that a new long-term pricing proposal is in development from 2026-27 onwards, aligned with the commissioning of OneSky, which is the new air traffic management system to replace TATS, which is currently being used, which will be a joint civil and military air traffic control navigation system. So what does that mean? Well, probably further increases should be anticipated. All right, how are we going? It's getting tiring, isn't it? But we're not done. So now we've got CASA. All right, CASA provides well over 260 regulatory services, obviously from pilot license applications and renewals to aircraft registration, medical processing, flight examiner authorizations, aircraft certifications, etc., all with fees attached. So CASA operates on a cost recovery model, which means as its own cost rises, staff wages, regulatory workloads, system upgrades, fees tend to follow. So the cost recovery implementation statements published for 2023, 23-24 and 25-26 all show incremental adjustments across service categories. Right? So it's not huge, and some might argue it's reasonable, but it compounds. The fees that tend to sting the most, though, include the pilot license rating applications, examiner renewals, and aircraft registration and medical fees. Right, so the CASA fee schedule is worth reviewing. It's at casa.gov.au, you can see that. But more importantly, the cost of expositions and ops manual application significant changes is in the thousands. Sometimes to change 2 or 3 paragraphs. And a lot of these costs are just grossly unbalanced compared to what you get for your money. And the cost of operators to pay these fees often leads to ops manuals not being amended, expositions not being amended, confusion on what significant change means, and when something does need to be done or doesn't need to be done, simply because of the costs. Just to give you an example, I'm not going to get these exact numbers right, but the argument still remains. For when I did my SOL 141 instructor certificate for my Part 141, I paid, I think it was like $1,400. When I left my other school to change the name of the HOFO, the WHO, they paid more than I did just to change that. That gives you an idea of the amount of work that would have gone into approving my certificate versus changing a name in a document that was already changed because we basically submitted the change for them. So a lot of work that needs to be done there. We just had the budget announced the other day. Buried in the 2026-27 federal budget was the measure that caught the GA community completely off guard. But the government has confirmed it will introduce an annual VH aircraft registration scheme from the 1st of July 2027. So what's all that about? We're going to find out more details next year. So after July this year, we should find out more about what it actually means. So right now, registering a VH aircraft is a one-time process. You basically pay about $130, I think it is, to get your mark, get your rego, and that's it. No ongoing renewal fee like a car, no annual charges or anything. So the proposed scheme would fundamentally change that, because turning aircraft registration into an annual obligation with a recurring fee attached is a big change. And no one really knows what the cost is going to be. If we do a bit of Googling and have a look, I think there's around 16,000 active VH registered aircraft on the register. I can assure you that many aren't flying. If you look at any airport, I'm sure you're going to see a bit of a graveyard somewhere with a bunch of regos stuck on it. So one good thing, if you don't have to pay for that, you can hand back the registration, which will put a lot more regos back into the system. So that'll be good. But, depending on what this cost does for operators, that's going to be, again, thousands of dollars more. Probably won't impact students and that sort of thing. But for private pilots, it's just another cost that's added on to all of this. But as always, CASA, when they do these things, have to have some sort of safety impact. And somehow they've managed to work in this registration change that it will have an impact on safety. So not quite sure how that works, but we'll watch this space. All right, then we get to our pilot medicals. And I know some of you have messaged me about your individual circumstances. I see things on Facebook and that all the time about your medical experiences. The CASA processing fee applies to all CASA medicals. But beyond that, the actual examination cost is set by an individual DAMI. It's unregulated, so DAMIs can charge what they like, and you're typically doing around a $250 to $350 initial consultation fee. But of course, on top of that, then you've got your audiometry, your ECG, your blood works, any optometry, that you could be upwards of $1,000 for an initial issue or more. I've heard some horrific prices, so do shop around. And it adds up very, very quickly. Add to that, of course, then you've got your renewal every year, pilots declaring medical issues in good faith, only then to be signed off by the DAMI or specialists, but to have AVMED subject you to more tests, which are often deemed unnecessary by the DAMIs and specialists, who are sometimes more qualified. And just another smack in the face, isn't it? Then, like here in Darwin or regional centres, there's the additional complication of not many DAMIs around, if at all. So you've got travel to several hours to where one is, or even interstate, to get that medical done, do those renewals, accommodation, transport, etc. Yeah. It's getting up there. ASICs, upwards of $280 every 2 years. Works out to be, about $140 a year. You can use your ASIC to get some discounts at the airport shops, remember. Not all of them do it, and it's not necessarily on all items, but you can get a few % off. So if you happen to do that enough times, you might get your $140 back in savings. But it really does prove to be very, very expensive. All right, then you got aircraft costs, and this is being pushed by many, many things. So labour shortages, first of all. The number of LAMEs and AMEs around is low. Labour rates have risen substantially as a global trend, and labour costs are increasing around 7% in 2023 alone. Regional Australia, just LAMEs unavailable. People are having to be flown LAMEs in to fix aircraft, especially if they've got specific certificates required. Parts and availability is getting difficult. The global aviation supply chain hasn't fully recovered from COVID still. There's many mum and dad shops and manufacturers that made certain parts who aren't doing it anymore. Engines, I can probably count, I wouldn't be able to count on two hands. It's more than that. The number of aircraft sitting on the apron at Darwin at the moment waiting on engines. They're taking ages to come, even when they've been ordered well in advance. Availability of parts in Australia is low, having to source them overseas. Then you've got the shipping, and of course if it goes in an aeroplane, a 50-cent screw costs $5, and it all adds up. Aging fleet, got SIDS to complete, parts, the whole lot. And of course, then there's insurance. So how are we going to keep some of these older aircraft running? I don't know, but that's going to be one to watch. All right. Then for the student pilot, before we even get to that, we've got the vet loans, the cost of getting a license in the first place. And there's obviously two ways to do this, and depending on how you want to look at it, whether you self-fund or go through a loan, I'm not going to go through the whole bit because it'll take too long, and maybe I can just do that as a whole separate episode. But the key point to remember here is, let's just say a typical loan is $120,000. You are looking at a big cost increase. It's not $120,000 worth of training. Right now, there's 20% added in indexation the moment you finish your course, and then there is a government 20% cut. So from a $120,000 loan, it'll go up quite a bit. You are going to take potentially, I don't know, it depends on how much you're going to earn, but I think the cutoff is about $67,000. Once you start earning more than that, you have to pay. So hopefully you've got a decent job before that you can start making a good headway. But you could be paying anywhere up to $160,000 for your $120,000 course. Of course, you might end up paying even more than that, depending on how long it takes you to pay it off. So really difficult. And then some students aren't even completing the flying components, learning about census dates and cutoff dates and things. So according to the Ombudsman report in December 2024, some completion rates at providers was as low as 34 to 50%. And if you pull out after the passing of a census date, you owe that money. That money comes off your HECS debt, unless the school is an honourable one, where I know there's a couple out there who actually refund the amount, but they're not obliged to. So you really need to understand the whole thing about fee help. But yeah, I'd love to get into that more as a dedicated topic, because I think it's one that everybody really needs to understand. So costs for operators, individual pilots, the industry broadly, there are some huge costs coming up. So what can we do about it? Well, for individuals, you need to get involved in your flight training experience, plan your hours. Every training flight needs to have clear learning objectives. You need to know what you're doing, and you need to show up prepared. All right. You can pay me to tell you 5 times if you like, but I'd much rather just charge you once for that. You need to take notes. You need to be prepared. You need to be organized, and then ask questions before the event. Don't rock up to the lesson and then ask your questions, because usually then it's too late to be able to cognitively do anything with that. Using simulators throughout training. CASA allows up to 50% of instrument hours to be flown in a simulator, approved sim. So if your school has one and they're not using it enough, then ask them to do that. Again, the sim costs half to 2/3 of the price of a wet rate aeroplane, and that's even before landing fees. So get into that. You can do emergency scenarios, things that you can't safely do on the aeroplane. You can give your student better exposure to actual IMC conditions by turning the cloud on, something we can't do in an aeroplane, and it's far better than just putting a hood on. If you're looking at just private flying and hiring aircraft, there's a lot of aircraft syndicates where you can go in 4th or 5th or 6th or whatever in the ownership of an airplane. There are little websites now where there are low-cost aircraft available for hire. You can look up different airports around the country and aircraft going out at very competitive rates. They obviously don't have all the overheads of flying schools, so don't begrudge a flying school. They've got rents and power and staff and everything else. They need administration costs, but there are cheaper options out there. If you are got a few pilots and you're needing to do a DAME, talk about maybe just bunching your dates together a little bit and sharing a car if that's a viable option, to try and do everything. Make sure that you get your reports and everything else done before the main appointment, and that way it can all be done and submitted in person on the day that you do your final DAME appointment. You want to budget in all your costs before you enroll. Things like an ASIC, don't get it too early because you don't need it at the beginning of your training. Some airports you will, and that's just a cost you're going to have to hit with, but otherwise you don't really need it until your first license application. So you might be able to save 6 months or, $70 by not getting it earlier than you really, really need to. All right, headsets and things. There's some fantastic headsets out there. I'm a advocate for getting the best headset you can afford, but don't skimp out as well. Get one that's too cheap. It affects your ability to hear. It affects your ability to, perform in the cockpit. So save money where there is money to be saved, but don't skimp on the really important things. Most importantly, we need to stand together where these costs, charges, fees and things are getting out of control, the rents that I've been hearing, the prices that are going up, the terms of lease just getting out of control in some places. So we really do need to stick together rather than just bitch and whine about it. So do stick together, write to your local MPs, talk to the reporting media, and get the story heard and get it out there. But ultimately, it's going to cost what it costs. Some things we can't control, other things we might be able to. The best thing we can do is be as prepared and organised and make every minute, every cent count the best way we can. All right, guys, that's it for today. I hope the situation in your area isn't too bad. But if you've got any stories or circumstances you want to share, feel free to hit me up. You can email me, info@trentrobinsonaviation.com.au. You can hit me up on any of the other messaging services, all in the episode notes. All my contacts are there. A bunch of you have been picking up some flight bags and logbooks, digital logbooks there, so thanks for doing that. There's a discount there for you all. I get a very small cut, basically a recommendation fee, but all goes towards everything that I'm doing here, and I really, really appreciate doing that. They're great products. I use them myself, and a lot of you have been messaging me back going, yep, you've loved it. So definitely check those out. You can see the Navico bag in the link and description there in the notes, and also the pilot logbook. All right, guys, until next time, take care. I will come back next week, so it won't be a big gap, and stay safe. And of course, as always, remember the golden rule: aviate, navigate, communicate. Cheers, everyone.